Hello, 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 and hi. Welcome to the Gracie Gatto podcast. And today we have Alan Reed, Democrat for Newmarket in the Newfield area, right? Am I saying this
That's
correctly?
right.
All right,
Yeah,
good.
Newmarket and Newfields.
Market in Newfields. And thank you for joining me today on such short notice. I know I had a few cancellations and things are crazy. So thank you so much for being so patient.
Of course. Thank you for calling.
All right. So let's talk about this bill that you are sponsoring. So let's get into it.
83, okay. HB 1633 simply says that we are going to notify, and by we, I mean the people that a sexual assault victim would normally see first when they are trying to get treatment, which would be the hospital, the doctors, sometimes the law enforcement officers. These are people who are already identified in statute,
Mhm.
but that we're going to notify them of what their legal rights are because we have, as it turns, a survivor's bill of rights in law already and have for a while, as do I think 46 other states. It's the same survivor's bill of rights. It's been written and pushed by an organization called Rise, which is a wonderful organization. But the problem is that in this Bill of Rights is, for
Mhm.
example, the right to a sexual assault state evidence kit, what we
Mhm.
call it rape kit, and a whole bunch of other rights. But victims don't know that they have these rights and no one has to tell them. And so what's that has resulted in is a number of victims coming to the hospital and either not realizing that they could get the help contained in these rights, nor being told or actually being denied in some cases, and that was my case.
So, tell me a little bit about your story. Like, obviously you're fired up about this, and you could tell it comes from a very personal place. So, give me a little bit of a background to that.
Right. In 2022, I was at a party with work colleagues, and I I had poured myself a I finished my drink. I was ready to call it a night. We were sitting down around a table, and the next thing I knew, right in front of me was an identical drink to the one I had just finished.
Hmm.
And I looked at the guy across from me, who I had known. We had worked together for a couple of years, and I was like, "Did you do this?" And he kind of shrugged, and I started getting into the drink, maybe a quarter or a third into the drink, and the next thing I know, I was waking up from my head on the table with him, and everybody else was gone. I sat up and started to get nauseated. He, well, I stood up to go to the bathroom because I was going to throw up, and he grabbed me by the arm. He yanked me back into the kitchen where we were. And then when I said, I'm going to throw up, I need to go into the bathroom. And it was a single stall bathroom. And he started groping me as I was throwing up. And the next, well, I got away from him. I locked myself in a room
Hmm.
and basically like a broom closet. And when I woke up, I called my husband, who took me to the hospital. And I told the doctor everything that happened and that I wanted a test to see that, what I had been drugged with, because I was and still am very certain that I was drugged.
Hmm.
And he said that because I had not been penetrated, he could not give me a rape kit that was the only way for me to access the particular tests, which would be more forensic tests and not medically necessary tests that would be needed to see whether I had been drugged or not.
What hospital
Uh,
was it?
which hospital? I don't want to say
Okay, okay, that's fair.
because there may be litigation later, and
Hmm.
Hampshire.
Uh, you cut out there just for a second. Um,
Uh,
Thank you for getting so personal. I knew that with this type of bill, it is a labor of love because you can tell it is. You could tell it came from someone who's been through it, doesn't want anybody else to go through it. So thank you for championing this bill, and hopefully we can get it signed into law. Where because after I've had, I think it's safe to say that most women have had some form of abuse. I think it's safe to say at this point. So when it happens to you, you are completely disheveled. You don't know which end is up. You don't know what is reality and did I hallucinate that? So there's a lot of things into play here, and I really congratulate you for bringing it forward and making something so uncomfortable a talking point to try to make things for the better, change things for the better. So I appreciate you. Thank you, Ellen, for everything you've done. And we're going to cut to some clips of YouTube video. Don't worry, I'm going to edit this so you can blah 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 blah. I'm going to edit some YouTube snaps that we got that would emphasize what Ellen Reed is trying to do, trying to make the state a better place. We are I'm a nonpartisan radio show, so I am not going to pander to the Democrats or Republicans or yada yada yada. This is what it is. It is a hearing that's going to be completely unedited, and I will supply a link for anybody to watch the entire segment. So we're all watching the same evidence at the same time because that's how we get accountability. Thank you so much, Representative Allen, for helping us out and keeping us informed and hopefully get us back on the right track.
Thank you.
All right, you're awesome.
My name is Ellen Reed. I represent Rockinghamton, which is Newmarket and Newfields. And this bill simply says that you should notify sexual assault victims of their already existing rights in law. This bill, as written before you right now, passed the House Health and Human Services Subcommittee on it unanimously last term. It passed the House Health and Human Services Committee unanimously last term. It passed the House unanimously last term. And in the Senate, it was amended to completely take out the meaning of the bill, which is the informing victims of their rights. And that amended version was indefinitely postponed in the Senate. The first time I introduced this bill in 2023, it was so soon after my own assault that I had reached out to friends to deal with my anxiety about telling my story. And they told me to use the third person when I testified. And so I had to email the committee before I testified on this bill and to tell them that even though I would be saying a woman in my district did this, she, her, etc., that it would be about me. And for transparency's sake, I needed to make the committee aware that I did not want to be lying, that this was something that happened to me personally. So I'm going to tell my story today directly because I think I am stronger now. So I'm going to tell you the genesis of this bill and the chronology of it as I experienced it. In 2022, when I was 6 years into my tenure here, I was at a party with colleagues. I poured myself one drink. I sat down across the table from a coworker that I had just really kind of barely knew. We had a couple conversations in the past about music, and he talked about his kids, and that was about it. I drank my drink. Everything was cool. Kind of chill vibe. And I was about to kind of call it a night, and I looked back, and I had an identical drink in front of me that I had not asked for, didn't know had been put in front of me, looked exactly like the one I had just finished. So I looked at the person sitting across the table from me, and I was like, you did that? And he's like, you know. So I trusted him. I didn't think of him as a bad guy. I didn't know him extremely well, but I had worked with him for 2 years. I got about a quarter of the way through the drink, and the next thing I knew, I was waking up from the table, and I can tell you, I can handle some alcohol. I have my fair share of drinking history, and I have never, ever passed out. I've never drank to the point of passing out, and certainly not after 1 1/4 drinks. And I was waking up because I was feeling my hand being massaged, and it was annoying me. And I don't know if you know what I mean when I say when you're half asleep and something's annoying you and you pull away and it keeps annoying you and you finally kind of get roused into being awake. That's what it was. And when I sat up, I saw that no one else was in the room except for him. And I immediately got nauseated, and I stood up, and he grabbed me by the arm because I wanted to go to the bathroom and throw up. He grabbed me by the arm, pulled me back into it was like a lounge, a kitchen. And I told him I'm going to throw up. So then he allowed me to go to the bathroom, but followed me into the single stall bathroom. And I couldn't even make it to the toilet. I only got to the sink. And as I was vomiting into the sink, he started groping me and he said, "Don't worry about puking. I'm only paying attention to your ass." Eventually, I got him out of the bathroom. I demanded that he go get my phone, and I locked the door. And later, when I finally thought he was hopefully gone, I opened it up, but he was standing blocking the door. He was a very large person. And then I got under his arm, and I ran to what is essentially a glorified broom closet, and I locked myself in that room, and I went to sleep. When I woke up, I called my husband, who took me to the doctor, who took me to the ER. I told the story to the doctor, and I demanded, because I wasn't there for medical reasons, I was okay medically. I was there because I knew I had been drugged, and I wanted evidence. And the doctor said, "Sorry, there's nothing we can do. We don't have access to those tests to test you for those drugs." And I said, "You can't tell me that. I've watched SVU." And just so you know, most of you probably have a good sense of my personality. I'm a fighter. I'm not dumb. I'm educated. At that point, I'd been in the house for 6 years. So it's not like I couldn't advocate for myself. And when I tell you that I could not get that doctor to give me a rape kit that contains the only tests that we have available to hospitals to test for those date rape drugs, he did test me for recreational drugs like cocaine and methamphetamine, which would never be used to rape a rape victim. I'm CDL, I'm not a recreational drug user, but can you imagine if I had been, how that would have come back on me as a victim, how that would have looked at about my credibility? I was insulted that he tested me for recreational drugs. So I lost forever my ability to get evidence against this guy. But as, I guess, maybe a couple weeks after leaving the hospital, as we get angrier and angrier and more stressed out, I called the hospital and said I had a complaint, that I had been denied appropriate care for what I was going through. And the hospital director actually called me into a joint phone conference and said that actually you received enough medical treatment to stabilize you, and that there was a policy, and he was very nebulous about this, that prevented them from giving rape kits to people who had not been penetrated. Now, I just told you the story. Everything from the drugging, which is its own definition of sexual assault with the intent to rape, to grabbing me and is physically assaulting me, to groping me, all of these fall under the definition. But he said that because I had not been penetrated, there was a law or policy that was preventing them from giving that kit. So I said to myself, well, it really sucks that I fell through the cracks here, but good thing it happened to me because I can do something about it. And thinking that this was not in the law, I started to go into the RSAs to find where we might put in something that said that someone alleging sexual assault had a right to a kit. Turns out it's in the law. In the Survivor's Bill of Rights. The Survivor's Bill of Rights, by the way, 47 states have adopted it because of an organization called RISE. RISE pushed the Survivor's Bill of Rights in 47 states, including ours, successfully, and they are in favor of this bill. So it turns out in RSA, we have a Survivor's Bill of Rights that says that survivors have a right to a kit. We also have an RSA saying the AG's office shall inform a list of people that include all hospitals and law enforcement officers of those rights, as well as how to process kits. But we do not have a law saying that those law enforcement officers and hospitals will inform the victims of those rights. We know that a right means nothing if the person who needs to use it doesn't know it exists. That's why we have Miranda rights. I'm sorry, please be patient. So, finding that there was this hole in the law, this gap, I went to the advocates that you would expect me to go to, and I said, I thought they were going to welcome me with open arms. wow, isn't it great that we can actually strengthen laws that help victims, because it sucks, but it happened to a rep, and a rep who's a fighter, and a rep who will go after that fight. So I went and I explained everything that happened to me, thinking these people would be trauma informed and really know how not to re-traumatize me. And I immediately got nothing but invalidation. And when I said, look, I fell through the cracks, just fix it, right, whatever. I don't know the system, just fix it. I'll put in the bill. They hummed and hawed for a little while, and they said to me, and this is basically verbatim, after hearing everything that happened to me, they said, we wrote the system the way it is and it's working perfectly. I'm sitting there in front of them as evidence. So then I got off that very tense Zoom, and I contacted the Office of Victim Advocate, and I had 2 very long phone calls with her, in which, because I think this is one of the things about the trauma of these kinds of crimes, is that for me and for many victims, it's not even the actual assault that's the worst, most traumatizing part. It's the way people treat you after, how they don't believe you and don't take you seriously and think that you're crazy. And that actually can drive you a little bit crazy and make you look crazy. So I'm thinking that this must have just been a me thing. Like, I just did something wrong. I'm always the one that finds the weird hole in the system, and it's not hurting anyone else. So, oh well. But the victim advocate, in these 2 long phone calls I had with her, confirmed for me that this was, and this is her word, an epidemic of doctors who didn't know how to deal with these kids. Not only did they not know the definition of sexual assault, despite the AG having to send them a document explaining it. By the way, that document is 128 pages long. What ER doctor is going to read a 128-page document from the AG's office? But not only do they not know what the definition of sexual assault is, but they also don't know that, for example, victims of assault have a right to have their evidence collected confidentially, pending their decision to prosecute, that victims have a right to deny any element of that kid. So I go back to the advocates and I say, it's confirmed, it's a systemic problem, it's not just me, it's not working perfectly, it's not working perfectly. And I said, kind of an ultimatum, write the bill or I'm putting it in myself with my own language. And I never heard from them again, not until they opposed the bill. So how this bill works is it essentially, and I believe HHS had amended it to have it basically be the purview of JALCAR. It looks like it's DOJ now in this language, so maybe I missed an amendment somewhere. But that will take that Survivor's Bill of Rights, we'll put it into a palm card format. Hospitals can do their own palm card as long as it's the same information. And anyone who's alleging that they're a victim of assault, they'll provide them that palm card. Here are your rights. Here are your legal rights. It's just the same as when you go to the hospital, you have to sign what? The Patient Bill of Rights. Exactly the same. There's usually like a laminated copy of the Patient Bill of Rights hanging on a ring. Same deal. That's all it says. The fiscal note on the first bill was 0. There was no fiscal note. So I'd like to address opposition. In the past, one of the opposition has been this is the role of the SANE nurses, because the same people who've opposed it are in charge of the SANE nurse program. I support the SANE nurse program wholeheartedly. The idea with the SANE program is, of course, that nurses are trained to not re-traumatize and to know those victims' rights and to know how to process the kits, so they're the experts. There's a few major problems. First of all, we don't have enough SANE nurses despite all the training. If you call a SANE nurse, like who's the closest SANE nurse at 3 o'clock in the morning that you can get in touch with? You know, how many hours of your body metabolizing evidence are you going to go through before the SANE nurse shows up and tells the doctor, yes, you have to collect that evidence? And the most important flaw, and I'm not suggesting the SANE nurse program should go away, but that it is not enough on its own. The most important flaw is if the doctor is too ignorant to the law to understand that what you went through is assault, they don't call the SANE nurse to come and tell them that they're wrong. It's a hole that needs to be fixed. Also, my opposition has said on video when opposing the last version of this bill that in relation to my description of my experience that, quote, victims who escape their attackers shouldn't have their evidence collected. Not only is that against the Survivors' Bill of Rights, but I'm hoping that all of you recognize that that is immoral. That if someone was assaulted and just escaped, was strong enough to escape the actual rape, the penetration, lock themselves in a room, they should have their evidence collected. That's a crime and a violent crime. There was a lot of talk in the previous hearings on this bill from opposition that kind of skirted around some, I would say, dangerous language that some victims are not victim enough. Basically, they didn't say the words false accusation, but that's what it kind of sounded like, and it wasn't the people you normally think those words from. But the general gist, the vibe of what I was hearing in both the House and the Senate hearings from the opposition was they don't want victims, or rather I should say certain victims, some victims, to know their rights. They're fine with some victims, but there are a certain subset of victims they do not want and actually actively want to obscure those rights from. Because if they know their rights, they might exercise those rights. And then that brings me to the next opposition, because not so much in the House, but once it got to the Senate, the argument became, well, if they know those rights and they exercise those rights, then it's really expensive to process the kits. It's really expensive to collect the evidence and process the evidence. I don't know, and maybe you do, because you're the experts. I'm not on CJ, but what other violent crime do we say it's too expensive to collect evidence on that crime? Do we do that with murder? In this particular fiscal note, the DOJ is saying that they estimate that there would be an extra 1,000 assault cases that are currently not having evidence collected that they would then have to collect the evidence of, and that would cost them about $1.1 million. I'll get around to the actual numbers, but I'm baffled that we're at the place that we're literally saying the people who are responsible for collecting the evidence and prosecuting the bad guys are saying that, but we don't really want to do our job, or maybe they do want to do it. I don't want to cast aspersions on motives, but they're basically saying, but then we'll have to do the work that we're supposed to actually be doing, and that costs money. Okay, we'll get to that too. We'll get to the money. So first, there was no fiscal note on the first one. There's no fiscal note because there's no fiscal note. It doesn't cost anything to inform victims of their rights, just like there's no extra cost involved in informing rapists of their rights to a free lawyer. But now it's $1 million because of these extra 1,000 cases. What they are saying is that with the most underreported and most underprosecuted violent crime, we know this. We know that it's the most underreported and underprosecuted violent crime. That is the only crime that we're going to say, but it's expensive to process the evidence, so we're just not going to. Not going to on some. Some do, some don't. Currently, you have a bill before you that I support and other people support that expands the Survivors' Bill of Rights. And I'm going to ask you, what the heck is the point of that if you're not going to tell the survivors what their rights are? You can put every right in the book as long as you keep it a secret from them. It's apparently what we want to do. Or at least some. As I was researching for this go-around further, I came across another instance of rape kits in law, which I was not aware of. For those of you who were in the House in 2020 when COVID hit, you may remember that the House, much against many protestations, including my own, failed to hold session in any way, shape, or form for several months, which resulted in us just blowing right by all of our deadlines, effectively killing about 700 bills. And so there was this mad, chaotic dash to just throw everything that the House had passed onto Senate bills, and we ended up with these giant omnibus monsters. One of those amendments was a non-germane amendment that was not a House bill that banned over-the-counter rape kits. So now, and that's in law, it is illegal to sell an over-the-counter rape kit. They exist. They're actually, while there are problems with the chain of custody, and so they're not always as important in cases, they are helpful information in a lot of cases, and they have helped other rape cases in other states. So just like you have your DNA tests over the counter and your paternity tests over the counter, your drug tests over the counter, rape kits over the counter are a thing. So we have the same opponents saying, don't tell some victims what their rights are, that they have a right to a kit. And also, they can't buy one themselves. If I didn't know the name of the organization, I would think it was like the Coalition for Perpetrators. I'm sorry. Just notify them of their rights. Notify the victims of their rights. That's it. That's it. That's all this is. I am not even mad at the doctor who denied me the kit anymore. I think he was an idiot. I think he didn't listen to hours of me crying and begging and screaming. He called a social worker to calm me down, but he didn't call a sane nurse. I think he's an idiot, but I'm not mad at him, because how can I be mad at a doctor who knows everything about the human body and just happens to not know what the AG's office sent in a 128-page document? I can say. So that's ignorance. But I can say that the people who are actively saying to obscure the rights from the victims who need them, that's malfeasance. They say it's expensive to inform the rights to victims because they might exercise those rights. But we, like I said, inform rapists of their right to a public defender. And that is very expensive. It is more expensive than a rape kit. Why are perpetrators getting more rights informed to them and more money spent on them than victims? So I want to get to the costs. I had a very productive conversation with some DOJ officials. The assertion, and I don't necessarily disagree, or I'm not saying that it's untrue. I mean, there are over-the-counter kits, and maybe there's differences, but they're saying, so a kit is essentially just like some swabs and some vials for blood, urine. That's what I needed. I didn't need any of the swabs. Whatever is used to like tape or whatever to pick up fibers, that kind of thing. But so the most expensive part of a kit is the processing, especially the PCR test for the DNA. And I can tell you this because I have a degree in molecular biology, and I actually have run PCR tests on DNA myself. The PCR machine is incredibly expensive itself. But the thing is they're saying there's 1,000 extra cases they'll have to run these kits on. And I understand that there may be some very special swabs that have a supply chain issue, and I'll get to that, but the extra 1,000 cases. So presuming that the really harsh cases, the really severe cases, the really penetrative cases are already getting those kits. That's what we're presuming. That the extra 1,000 are the cases that the opposition had referred to kind of as lesser than. Maybe someone was aggressively groped, or maybe something like me where they might have just been drugged. That those are the lesser cases, but those are the very cases that don't need the DNA test. And that's the most expensive portion, is processing the PCR on the DNA. So in my case, it would have been a blood and urine for the drugs. That's it, done. In some people's case, it might just be a fiber pull to see for hair or whatever. So the 1,000 cases that are being added are, by definition, the less expensive to process than the severe penetrating assaults. Now, the other thing I spoke with the DOJ official on was the fact that if he's saying that there's a supply chain issue with these very, very special swabs that are somehow more specialized than the OTC kits, then we can deal with that. Because if it is if they're getting a deluge, if this passes and all of a sudden they're just inundated with a tidal wave of people demanding a kit and they're running out of kits, what they can do is make like smaller sub kits, non-penetrative kits that don't include the expensive or supply chain restricted swab. And the officials seem to agree that that was a potential solution to the supply chain problem. And we've already solved the problem with, it's going to not be the cost of the PCR on all of those kits. It's probably not going to be PCRs on most of those. So then we get to, if it costs anything at all, how do we fund it? And I gave two very good options. One is just make a donation bucket so that they can receive money donated to them specifically for the purpose of processing these extra kits. The other one, and it just so happens that I knew about this because of my previous work with the DOJ on a different bill, that they are also in charge of enforcing Consumer Protection Act. And in the Consumer Protection Act prosecutions, they actually make a lot of money for the state, but they're only allowed, like millions, but they're only allowed to keep a tiny fraction of what they make for the state. So I would like to lift that cap, let them keep more. That's an easy fix to me. So donations, lift the cap, or both, I'm fine.
I want to ask a question real quick.
Yes.
Insurance. This is a medical procedure. Did you look into whether or not insurance companies could be made to cover this?
So yes, and at the end of the day, you have to remember, and this was what the director of the hospital had told me, there's a difference between forensic and medical. Medical is meant to treat the patient, make sure they're healthy, make sure they're okay. Forensic is the gathering of evidence. Health insurance doesn't cover forensic gathering. They do cover the exam. We also, in that Survivor's Bill of Rights, guarantee that victims have a right to receive an exam free of charge. So for the victims who don't have insurance, they can ask for compensation for that medical exam. But the actual collection of evidence is not a medical exam because it's evidence to prosecute a crime and not to stabilize them. No worries. So I'm just going to wrap up and take questions so that I understand, I am a huge supporter of the rights of the accused. I taught Constitution to college kids for a few years. I'm a huge supporter of the rights of the accused. The reason we had to put in our Bill of Rights federally the rights of the accused is because the accused were the most directly at risk of having their rights infringed by the government. And the whole point of the Constitution is to rein back governmental powers. But we've arrived at this really ironic place now where the accused have more rights than the victims. The accused have the right to be told what their rights even are, not the victims. And how easy is it to do that? And why are we not doing that? I would argue this could be expanded to inform all victims of crime of their rights. But as far as my situation, let's just please let survivors know that they have a right to have their evidence collected so that they can go after it, because I'm really sick of not taking people seriously when they're assaulted. Don't obscure people's rights, just tell them their rights. That's it. That's all this is, and I'll take questions.
Thank you. One of the questions I had jotted down, and I think you answered, with regard to if these things are an actual kit, and if they open it to only use part of it, does it spoil the whole kit? And what did we do before kits? I mean, did we just collect evidence and put it together? That's
exactly it. So right now, from a procedural standpoint from the DOJ, they want to keep that kit completely in whole for that one victim. And so they don't reuse any elements. So one of the arguments is if they open up the kit for just a hair sample, they're wasting all the rest of the kit because all of it has to be thrown away. I don't see any reason why we can't reuse elements so that you can't have that testified, but that's beside the point. What I offered to them was that if you get this tidal wave of people who were just like aggressively groped or drugged, asking for their kits as a result of being informed of their rights, then okay, let's start making sub kits. Let's make non-penetrative kits. Let's make potential drug kits. Maybe they were drugged. It's just blood and urine. Like, we can make other kits that don't contain the more expensive or more restricted elements. Why is it that that's harder to do than just tell people their rights?
is there a reason that you didn't repeal, and I know you probably it's because you got enough to do with just this, but didn't repeal the over-the-counter rape kit that got stuck in there somehow?
I didn't find that until I submitted the bill.
Okay, all right. Because as you were
I would be
talking,
happy with an additional amendment if you thought it would pass to repeal that.
I don't understand why you can't buy whatever you want to buy.
It's literally paper and a swab. That's all it is. And you send it off. And that was the question that the senators asked is what are we actually restricting and making illegal here is a box with paper and a swab.
And also, there's companies that you can go to get your own blood test, whatever you want. And if they were to offer this, does our law prohibit them from conducting these tests privately? These labs that you go to, if you want to have your blood tested, I'm trying to remember the name of it. LabCorp, there you go. That you can have any other kind of test you want as long as you pay for yourself. So are they allowed to do those, or does this?
So what was explained to me, and part of this was explained to me, and I'm having a hard time. Part of this was explained to me by that director of that hospital, so I kind of almost want to take everything he says with a grain of salt, but what my understanding of the situation is, the most common date rape drug after alcohol, which is the most common, is not GHB or Rohypnol. It's actually Benadryl and over-the-counter sleep aids. GHB and Rohypnol are hard to access, illegal, and expensive, and if people know what you're carrying, they'll look at you funny. Benadryl, no one's going to look at you weird. It's cheap. It's available everywhere. And so it probably was that because I didn't have any of the symptoms of I didn't have like memory blackout or anything like that that's typically associated with GHB or Rohypnol. It probably was Benadryl or something like that. But the point is that the medical director explained to me that the reason the hospital could not test me was because they don't have a medical, again, the difference between forensic and medical, basically the test that I would require because I was not overdosing and I was not, well, I'll just say they have tests. If you come in and you're experiencing overdose, they treat the symptoms of the overdose. If your body system is depressed, they'll keep you alive, however they have to do until you've processed the drug, for example. But they don't have a test for what?
I'm thinking they'd have to almost do a mass spectrometer test like they would do in an autopsy.
Right.
Why did this person die? They have to search for everything.
They have to. So I was stable when I went in, right? I'm not in danger of suffocating or anything. I was dehydrated and traumatized, but I was medically okay. And so what they're testing for at that point is a metabolite of a metabolite of metabolite of Benadryl, which has no medical effect on me at the point that I'm having that taken. And what I was told is there's only a handful of labs in the whole country that process that test because it's just not medically needed. The people who use it are the DOJs of the 50 states. And so all the DOJs use these few number of labs for this extremely small trace level of drugs that are not actually going to be a medical problem at that point. And that is why that I believe LabCorp and these other places wouldn't necessarily have access to those tests, but I did not call LabCorp and check.
Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And I will be in touch regarding potential amendment if the committee feels that's appropriate.